All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Furdyk, co-founder and director of innovation at TakingITGlobal. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And a big thank you to Lucy and all the volunteers who have made this conference possible. We're thrilled to be a partner and collaborator and look forward to many more great sessions for the rest of the day. I'm excited to be with you today to share a little bit about a program that we started about a decade ago and kind of got distracted with all these other things we were doing and are now kind of relaunching and bringing back to life. It's called Future Friendly Schools. So I'll be sharing a little bit about that, but also about our journey as an organization. We just celebrated this month our 25th year. When I co-founded it with my colleague Jennifer, we were in our last year of high school. So we were just students ourselves and really had a vision to build this global movement and organization. And I'd love to have folks just join the chat and let me know where you're connecting from. And just as a bit of background and acknowledgement from my part, I want to start by sharing a resource that we've been building and evolving for about 5 or 6 years with several Indigenous partners called Whose Land, www.whose.land. And the vision of this site is really to help all of us reflect about the Indigenous territories and lands that we're situated on. And you can click on Where Am I? And depending on the data we have, it'll show you more about the land that you're on. So I'm connecting today from Treaty 13 territory, Dish with One Spoon Treaty here in Toronto to Toronto, Ontario, traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Wendat peoples, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And this site has resources about Indigenous communities globally, about the history of residential schools in Canada and the US so far with different partner organizations, with treaties. We recently launched an Indigenous business layer here in North America to support economic reconciliation. And we've also been working with some of the Indigenous youth in our network and on our team to interview and develop leadership stories. We have now almost 600 interviews and stories of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Native American leaders and their stories. And we welcome nominations and contributions to that resource. So just starting by acknowledging my appreciation for the stewardship of the land that Indigenous communities have really played a role in since time immemorial. So just as a bit of a quick recap, I know some of you have probably heard me speak before, if others haven't, just reflecting a bit on the process of growing up digital, as Don Tapscott called the book. For me, that began in 1984. I was 2 years old and my family bought a Commodore 64. You can see my dad was as excited as I was, I think, that Christmas morning to put me down in front of that computer, which was the best-selling computer of all time for many years, I think only recently surpassed by the iPad. And it's amazing to think about that really being the beginning of the blurring between consumer and creator. You can barely make out that box here on the right, but that was Fisher-Price. Not only did they make toys, but they also back then made educational software. And it wasn't long before I went from playing those games with my dad to actually learning basic programming, line 10, line 20, I'm sure many of you remember, and creating my own software programs. It's amazing to think about how far we've come. My son now is in grade 7, but when he was born, with traveling globally all the time, we'd be connecting with him over FaceTime. And so that experience at a young age, imagine being able to video conference with your parents. It doesn't matter where they are in the world, being able to have them present with you, or visiting the store in Tokyo and being able to interact with a robot and receiving services and mentorship, or having a conversation. And these technologies have leapfrogged even dramatically since then. I'm sure some of you have followed AI and some of the new humanoid robots in development by Tesla and others. But for me, my kind of journey to entrepreneurship and social innovation began with the nature sale. My first business was selling some flowers I had torn out of my mom's garden and learning about the value of money and wanting to figure out, these computers, this technology, things are expensive. How can I earn my own money to buy software, to buy computer stuff? And so it really began on this journey of finding a problem. And for me, I was an avid collector of baseball cards, big fan of our Toronto Blue Jays, just a couple blocks away from me. World Series winners when I was just 10 years old, 92 and 93. And I always had sports cards in a mess all over the house. So my first business was actually programming a piece of software that let people organize their sports cards collections. But not one person ever called me to buy it. So I learned pretty quickly this quote from Thomas Edison: I haven't failed. I found 10,000 ways that don't work. Creating opportunities to fail quickly, to learn from that failure. I know business leaders like Jeff Bezos always talk about the cost of trying to avoid mistakes. There's so much value that comes from kind of failing fast. Everyone talks about pivoting. How can we create opportunities to accelerate the learning and to create and build ideas? And it was around that time when I was in grade 8 that the internet came into being, starting with America Online discs showing up in the mail. And in grade 8, I created my first website, The Internet Exposed, showcasing how easy it was to use technology. And the companies I wrote emails to, like Intel and Microsoft, had no idea. I was just a teenager. They were sending software products to review and write about. And I became a journalist with over 1,000 readers that first month. And our site grew as I kind of found more young people in chat rooms, and we built a community. And we ended up building a global site that had over 1 million monthly readers while I was in high school. And we ended up selling that company because we had trouble raising venture capital. As teenagers, as young people in that time, there weren't a lot of investors that took us seriously. And that led to an opportunity to be in the media. And I never watched Oprah, but apparently a lot of people around the world do. And so after being on the show and being invited to speak at conferences like this one, the Business Council, and getting to meet one of my childhood heroes, Bill Gates, I was flooded with emails from young people around the world asking for help, mentorship, advice. I realized how lucky I was to have the support and encouragement, and my parents putting up with probably much lower grades than I would have had if I was fully focused on school and not these different businesses and ideas I was starting. But that same year was the year that the United Nations set out the Millennium Development Goals in 1999. And I'm sure now many of us know the SDGs. So many of us are working on the SDGs, and I'm preaching to the choir. All of you are, I'm sure, working on organizations and initiatives that are engaging with the SDGs. But I thought about, okay, how could I use my skills to build an initiative that could address these issues? And part of that was inspired by meeting Bill Gates and him being more excited about his foundation and the social issues he wanted to address than about his work at Microsoft, which was kind of coming to an end. So around that same time, I was also thinking about, what are the gaps that we could address? And for me, I wasn't a very engaged student in high school. I saw the rise of the World Wide Web and technology, but I didn't see that our education system was incorporating it in ways that could make learning more engaging. And this study didn't continue, but some of you may remember this study the DOE did back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they asked graduating grade 12 students, did they find their courses meaningful? Did they think school was interesting? And did they think what they learned in school would be important later in life? And you can see already, just at the cusp of this kind of internet-driven era, these numbers were heading not in a great direction. Pearson continued this work, and there was partnership with My Voice that did a student report over a decade ago that kind of had similar feedback. And in Canada, the Canadian Education Association also did a study called What Did You Do in School Today? That talked about this kind of gap in engagement, from the end of elementary school to high school. At the same time, there are studies that have shown that the peak of interest in social issues is around that late middle school, grade 7 and 8 level. So we kind of saw an opportunity to launch an organization, and it's 25 years ago this month, called TakingITGlobal. And this mission we had was, could we help young people understand and act on local and global issues? And over the past quarter century, which they feel very old saying that word, we've developed programs across these 3 areas of supporting youth action and social innovation, facilitating connected learning, and fostering creativity and digital skills. And you can imagine in the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of funding out there to do this work. This wasn't a category of most foundations barely had heard of the internet, didn't even have websites. And so it was quite challenging in those early days to actually get any funding for this work. And so what we ended up having to do was actually build technology for other charities and nonprofits to actually raise the money to build our own programs. We also became aware of Roger Hart's ladder of youth participation, thinking about what programs could we build that really empower students like us to take these issues into our own hands and create change. And really impressed with that, looking at those different levels as we talk about, one of the things today I'll talk about is student voice. What level on this ladder of participation are our initiatives involving student voice? How are we creating, initiatives and programs that allow for youth to take initiatives and make decisions? And even we have some initiatives here in Canada to lower the voting age, both at the city level and at the federal level, to just 16 instead of 18, providing that earlier opportunity. I don't have a screenshot of it on the slide, but there's also a fantastic book called The Case Against Adolescence. I remember seeing a keynote speaker Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a kind of famous psychologist, talk about the fact that we've kind of invented this idea of adolescence, but really, young people in society have played such a significant role in past centuries at a young age. And so why are we kind of infantilizing youth and not giving them opportunities? So we had the opportunity to attend our first UN conference, the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002. And with our sister organization, the Global Youth Action Network in the US, which we now kind of operate as a 501c3 and is ECOSOC accredited, we were able to accredit and have a small group of youth participate in that summit. And it was amazing to see young people at the table. And we thought, well, how could we increase these opportunities and these roles for youth to have a voice in global policy? So when it came time to run the World Summit on the Information Society, we helped to facilitate the first ever youth caucus that had a role, and in fact, advocating for the first youth paragraph that was included in the Declaration of Principles at that conference. One of the things that we did with support from the government of Switzerland is we launched a series of national Information Society youth campaigns all across the developing world, where youth advocated for and raised awareness for the need to have funding for technology, for education, for employment, for collaboration. We were also hired by UNDP to develop a youth action guide around the MDGs in the late 2000s. So creating opportunities, creating resources, and then bringing those youth from around the world to these global policy summits where they were able to speak to their ministers, where they were able to advocate for increased funding. It was exciting to play a role in that kind of systems change. And it speaks to this transition, I think, from this kind of world of the past with stability, certainty, simplicity, and clarity, and largely comfort, to this new kind of VUCA world that Patrick Hollingworth talked about in his organization, his book about the light and fast organization, this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, this kind of these realities that are this next generation, my son's generation, are being confronted with on a regular basis. And I'm sure many of you have followed some of the research that the World Economic Forum has done around, the fastest growing jobs and opportunities, the skills that are in demand. My son came home from school from yesterday and he said, I have an important assignment to do. I said, what is it? He said, cursive writing. Our current government here in Ontario has decided to bring back cursive writing after it was eliminated by previous governments. Yet you have the World Economic Forum talking about top skills around analytical thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking, resiliency and curiosity. So I think everything that we're talking about at this conference, and many of you are already doing, is really focused on these skills, building empathy, leadership, and social influence. Just laughing at Lucy's comment in the chat. So these are really the skills that I think global citizenship initiatives, when executed well, strengthening all of these skills and this kind of project-based learning that we all promote. Even Domino's, has developed AI and machine learning to make sure that pizzas are done perfectly using AI. So it's really influencing every industry. And when you look at even the growth of jobs, the growth of economic opportunities is almost entirely through non-routine cognitive jobs that we're preparing students for. So that kind of leads me to the work that we are committed to developing and supporting, and our kind of life's work this last quarter century about fostering a friendly future, I think, for all of us, for students at our schools. And that really focuses on 3 areas of global citizenship, student voice, and environmental stewardship. And so with global citizenship, I think we're all committed to developing informed and engaged students for this globally connected world. It's not the future anymore, it's already happening today. Yet when I was speaking to a group of our fellows from one of our social innovation programs, I was talking about how in the early 2000s, the way that we all use technology was so much more communal at internet cafes, at telecenters, in computer labs. But today, in fact, although the technology is touted to be connecting us, in fact, a lot of the ways that young people especially are using and experiencing technology is quite isolating, not only in the way that it's individualized, because the devices many of us have access to, but also the fact that often the social networks we're connected to are more about reinforcing and deepening our connection to the people we already know, instead of exposing us to different views and perspectives. And that's what Taking It Global at its core was when we launched the site and the initiatives as this kind of social network for social good, exposing people to different cultures, different opinions and perspectives, and creating learning experiences connected to that. So you all know about the SDGs, but I think one of the things that's important to reflect on is I'm sure the reason that we're all here and doing this work is that we all had some sort of experience, and many experiences probably, that inspired us to care more deeply about an issue than we otherwise would have. For me, it was my first trip to our beautiful West Coast, to British Columbia, where I was exposed to the natural beauty, as a child, our first family trip. And I remember meeting a young person there at a store that had a table set up, and they had started an organization called Kids Can Save the Planet. And they were promoting environmentally friendly actions. This is probably in the mid-1990s. And I thought, wow, I want to bring that organization back. I want to start that organization as a club in my school, like visiting these mountains, seeing these beautiful forests, learning about deforestation and acid rain and climate change made me want to take action. Yet when I got back to my school, it was challenging because people said, well, we can clean up our yard, but how can we really save the planet? There wasn't that sense of connectedness that we have the opportunity to leverage today because of social networks, because of the internet. Students, it's much easier today to feel part of a global movement. And in fact, I think the rise of that connectedness is one of the things that's led to the increased strength and efficacy and engagement in environmental movements, especially youth-led ones around the world, like those led by and inspired by Greta Thunberg's work. So as an organization, another free resource I'll share, we have a program called Commit to Act that's recently been relaunched as an app. And Commit to Act helps students learn about the bigger issues, but also about individual small actions they can take to reduce the impact of something like fast fashion or the use of plastic. So it's both about tracking the impact of your everyday actions and quantifying that in terms of carbon reduction, but it's also about connecting students to organizations, to movements, to policy change efforts behind these initiatives, because obviously it's not just enough to change our personal behavior, we have to change the systems. Or our guide to action, now been downloaded over 3 million times in many languages. And so this is an initiative that we started in the early 2000s because there was a leadership class in the curriculum, and my co-founder Jennifer did her master's on youth-led action in a global context. And so we interviewed young people globally about their social change projects, and we abstracted what they had learned and what they wished they knew, and we created these free, downloadable, open source, Creative Commons action guides in many languages and around many topics, like HIV/AIDS, with Adobe on creative expression, on youth volunteering, on climate change. So these are all available in many languages, completely Creative Commons, free for you to remix and share, based on the impact and stories and supports needed for youth to launch successful social change projects. And then we were able to take that work a little bit further. We were then invited to say, okay, it's one thing to have ideas, but how can we actually direct funding to young people to make their ideas happen? And so during the 2000s, we collaborated first with the Library of Alexandria and the Swiss government to launch a project called Youth for Change all around the Arab region. We worked with Pearson Foundation and Microsoft in over 50 countries to fund youth-led initiatives and over 100 Sprout Fellows. And then when our current government was elected, the Prime Minister appointed himself the Minister of Youth. And in 2016, the government approached us and said, could we scale this work at a much bigger level? Not dozens or hundreds, but could we create opportunities for thousands of youth in Canada to receive funding for their community-led social impact initiatives? And for us, it was a kind of perfect culmination of bringing together student voice with global citizenship, social action, environmental stewardship work that we had been promoting for many years. And so we had the opportunity to launch a program called Rising Youth that over the last 5-6 years has supported over 7,000 projects. And I'll just share this little video here about that project. Let's see, Lucy, if we can get it to play the first uploaded video. Great.
Do you have an idea to make a positive impact in your community? What if we told you we can provide the funds to make it possible? Rising Youth offers volunteer-led community service grants to youth ages between 15 and 30 living in Canada. Pour faire une demande, visite le site internet jeunesenaction.ca. Choisis le montant de ta subvention de 250, 750 ou 1500 $ et remplis le formulaire de demande. Notre équipe est prête à t'aider si tu as des questions. You can expect a response within 30 days. Once your project is approved, you will receive the funds and you can get started. Tu auras une réponse dans les 30 jours suivants. Une fois ton projet approuvé, tu recevras les fonds et tu pourras commencer.
I'd say go for it, like you're not losing anything.
On croit que les jeunes ont vraiment le pouvoir de faire une différence autour d'eux.
Quand t'es dans Jeunes en Action, t'es dans la famille forever.
It is one of the greatest things that you can do.
One of the things that I was most proud of about this program, you might have heard in the video, we'll get back to you within 30 days. We actually managed to achieve a turnaround time of just 9 days on average. So we held ourselves highly accountable to youth and students. 81% of those 7,000 plus who received these grants were from underrepresented communities. And we also had a net promoter score of 84. So a really high level of satisfaction in terms of how can we make sure that we're getting funding out as quickly as possible to youth and students with ideas to make an impact in their community. And I hope this idea of micro grants and the kind of student funding is something that many of you, I'm sure, are already doing or could consider doing in the classrooms and schools that you support around the world. We're excited that this work that we kind of piloted at great risk, even to our charitable status, giving out this kind of funding. Originally, the government was a little bit skeptical, but now, based on the results that we demonstrated, they've actually scaled up the funding available and invited organizations across the country to apply for more than $30 million that they've set aside for youth initiatives and micro grants from coast to coast to coast in Canada. So for us, that's kind of the ultimate indicator of system change. Now, we proved it was possible. They've now taken it on and they're running this at a larger scale as a funding initiative. Even though we've moved on and we're not part of it, we got to catalyze the system to now offer part of this themselves. So that's really, really kind of exciting. Lucy or Anum, could you click back to the slides? For some reason, when I click slides, it's not going back to the slides as being selected. There we go. Thank you. So we've also created a number of supporting resources to spark interest, because for us, our tagline is inspire, inform, and involve. And we see that as a pathway to action. So obviously not every young person maybe has an idea yet. So how do we spark their interest? How do we create learning experiences that get them to think about what they might want to do something about? One of those resources is called International Days, where you can learn about and students can learn about all the different days that happen across the year that have significance, why they were created, what the history is behind them, and what are some of the organizations working to address that issue. We have the Global Gallery. This was started with a kindergarten teacher saying, I'd love to exchange artwork with schools and students around the world. You can imagine in 2000, even digital cameras had just come into being. They were $1,000 for a digital camera. And so we managed to convince HP to sponsor us with 100 digital cameras and scanners that we sent all over the world. I remember, some of the young people from having to travel hours to another country or community just to get this scanner, this digital camera. They then became Global Gallery ambassadors and helped us take photos, scan artwork, now to the point where there's over 15,000 images in the Global Gallery from over 100 countries. So, creating this set of free online learning resources. We've collaborated for many years with Terry Godwald and Sarah and the Center for Global Education, which was founded by Terry as a teacher at a school. He was trying to create global experiences for his students, collaborating with other schools and getting guest speakers. And he found when he called the UN agencies or when he called organizations and said, I'm a teacher at a school, no one would call him back. But when he said, I'm the executive director of the Center for Global Education, all of a sudden people returned his call. And so the Center for Global Education was founded. For many years, they ran it as a program, and we spun it out as its own charity last year. And they run two really thoughtful programs. One is Global Encounters, which organizes a series of video conferences connecting schools and classrooms around global policy. And their whole team is in Baku right now in Azerbaijan at COP. I know they had a session just a few days ago connecting schools around the world, and also Decarbonize. And so, I really found this quote stood out to me from the former chief of staff at OECD, talking about this idea of global competence really being the centerpiece of their broader vision for the 21st century education, which they saw as being shaped by these three principles of equity, cohesion, and sustainability. So how do we bring those principles into our schools, into our communities? I think you can see how enabling youth and enabling people to create projects and programs that encourage them to collaborate and develop these skills is a clear way to do that. Student-led action, real-world collaboration as a driver of engagement and impact. So the second focus area for us has been around learner voice and student voice, and how do we build the capacity of systems to ensure that that happens, and back to Roger Hart's ladder, in a way that's authentic and meaningful. And for us, one of the ways that we were challenged to do that is through professional development. We developed courses that help teachers bring student voice into the classroom and sharing best practices from around the world. Sharing programs like the one that Terry and Sarah run, Decarbonize, where they have tens of thousands of students in many schools working together to develop their opinions, their perspectives, their kind of policy demands, and then some of them having the opportunity to represent their group and travel to these UN conferences, where we've accredited several of them to attend in Baku this week and to actually have their voice heard at a global level. And policymakers are paying attention. This is just one. I happen to be visiting this school, creating these connections between these global conversations and local action, local voice, where students, policymakers want to be seen as engaging with youth. And so creating opportunities for your students to have that impact and to question and challenge governments and challenge leaders has been really powerful to observe. This is a photo from a few years ago, and you can see Greta Thunberg in the front row and many of the Decarbonize students there. Being able to be at these global events where you have ministers, you have delegates, so much more accessible than they would otherwise be in their own countries and communities, where you can't really get a meeting with a minister, but when you're at the COP conference, when you're at these global summits, all of a sudden you can have an influence and have that FaceTime. It's been really powerful to see. Those Rising Youth grants I mentioned, one of the things we found was that after this 5 years, working with over 7,000 youth and awarding over $7 million in funding and almost 1 million, 750,000 volunteer hours and 600 partner organizations, we found that because of this trust, because of that first approval letter, and I remember as an organization, we were getting started, many of our first grants and applications were declined. They're too ambitious, too complicated. People didn't understand the internet. How do you create that first experience, that first approval that we got made a huge difference in boosting our impact. And so for us, it's not so much about the grant, it could maybe only be $250 or up to $5,000. That was our range. But giving that young person an approval, something to put on their resume, that encouragement to pursue their ideas. What we found is at the end of that process, 98% of them were more likely to participate in community service in the future. And 95% of them actually say as a result of their projects, they've actually created opportunities to increase the community involvement of others. So it wasn't just those 7,000 grantees. We found more than 100,000 youth were impacted and included in the projects that were created, and over 59,000 volunteers were engaged through this programming. So it had a huge ripple effect in terms of that one approval, that one bit of funding for that opportunity, and that opportunity it created for others. And so one of the things that we also were developing at that same time, and that we've open sourced and shared, I'll share the link at the end, is those teacher learning, professional learning resources for education for social innovation. How do we unlock a learning experience to have teachers feel supported and ready to create projects like this in their classrooms and to enable all the wraparound learning that goes with it. So we started by developing those courses and programs with one school district here in Ontario. Our local school district, the TDSB, has about 500 schools. We then scaled that work to 6 districts all over Ontario. We then went global. We worked with different international school networks and independent schools in the US. And then we've open sourced all of that professional learning. I'll share the link with you at the end that any of you can use and remix and build on so that it can have a lasting impact. So just to show you a little bit of what that actually looked like when you had educators collaborating across different school districts and unlocking these kind of projects, I'll ask Lucia or Num to press play on the second video, which is the Education for Social Impact community that was built here in Ontario.
Today we are at the Ontario Science Centre.
People all across Ontario, people all the way from Niagara,
came all the way down here.
Teachers and students who are showcasing and celebrating their social innovation projects.
We decided to base it on water crisis.
We did it on teen suicide.
We want to clear the stigmatization around mental illness.
We're trying to give back to our community by making meals for the local food bank.
So we're describing how we can resolve this problem.
And we believe by solving this issue, we could solve other issues around the world.
We developed and co-designed this professional learning experience over the past few years. This past cycle was implemented with 90 teachers across 6 different school boards to improve their practice and to help give student voice in their learning and to help students really take an issue that they care about and turn it into a project that has an impact in their school, in their community, and in the world.
We're just looking at girls who can't go to school and have to work or get married at a young age.
We noticed that many ESL students or even English students, they don't really know what are refugees.
They came up with projects based on what they feel are important. Some of them are hard-hitting topics that sometimes we don't talk about enough in our classrooms.
We did it because not a lot of people take it as serious as it is.
If one person is diminished of their rights, everyone else's rights are diminished as well.
Students are looking at these issues and they're finding solutions. They're trying to break vicious cycles and create virtuous ones.
We believe by educating the youth, we could create a sustainable future.
We're going to have a huge assembly, show all of our videos that we've created.
Another idea is to create a cell phone app where people can just share their experiences and receive advice from other people.
It is the way the 21st century learner is going, to incorporate technology to get their message across.
Right now we have a very exciting partnership with TakingITGlobal.
We were able to bring all of our staff to the TakingITGlobal Social Innovation course, and the really great thing about it was that it provided an opportunity for us to kind of have a level ground, that we were all kind of starting from the same point.
I fundamentally understand as a principal that you need to be professionally developing your staff if you want them to be able to do that work in the classroom with students.
The time that was most valuable for teachers were times that they were able to collaborate and work together to find approaches that they can use in their classrooms and with their students.
Each of the webinars they went through allowed me to kind of branch out in different aspects to include different pieces in their presentation to allow them to explore further their topics and where to take their topics.
We all want to change something that we're passionate about.
It's so gratifying to know that we help make a difference in someone's life.
Everybody took part in raising awareness. By coming here to raise awareness,
it's really easy. Students can be taught many things within the classroom, but the moment you take things outside of a classroom, there is an igniting that happens within their spirit. It allows students to really recognize the opportunities that are available to them, that despite you being a student, you can make major changes within your school community and even starting at the global level.
I'm grateful for what I have right now because those children who are really being abused, they don't have what I have. And right now, every time that I think about eating my food or going to sleep, I'm thinking about those children who don't have it. And I'm thinking about how we can change it.
We all want to help the world, help our community to get to a better future.
It was very motivating seeing everyone trying to make a change in the world and noticing that not only is coming and doing this in the school a really big impact on everyone else in our school, but it's going global and it's going worldwide, and that's going to make a really big difference.
What we're really trying to do here is take learning beyond the walls of the classroom. What if every student had the opportunity to be supported in pursuing their world-changing ideas, being witness to the kind of dreams and the energy and enthusiasm that I've seen in the eyes of each and every student that has presented their project here today? It's really a dream come true, where we can shape and design the future of education together.
So that work was really powerful, and we're excited to have been able to take all of those learning experiences and share them openly. There is also a link that I think Lucy will share to the research that we've done around Rising Youth and the research that we've done around youth grant making, because I know that many organizations may find that helpful. Even though we didn't continue that program, we published a lot of the lessons learned, the insights and reflections, and I welcome many of you to make use of, borrow, steal those ideas or approaches if you're looking to support kind of student-led initiatives or projects in your communities. And so we've transitioned a bit as an organization because there was a stat I used to always share in my presentations about 99% of students in Canada have access to the internet outside of school. And it seems impressive. We were #2 in terms of the most connected country. But what about that last percentage? Never really thought as much about it until we were presented with the opportunity to take over a program that was started in the Arctic between ITK and Cisco. And now our Governor General, Mary Simon, inspired that project by challenging the corporate sector to say, how can we improve education outcomes for students living in the most remote communities in Canada? How do we increase their quality of education and create opportunities for them? And so we've grown that program when we were asked to take it on 8 years ago, called Connected North, from just one school here in Iqaluit, Nunavut, to now serving 199 schools in some of the most remote communities in Canada and really on the planet, if you look at the Arctic Circle and the geographical remoteness of these communities and connections. And looking at, how can we leverage all of these great technology tools and resources to connect with students and to provide them with almost like leapfrogged access to education experiences. And a lot of that is through virtual field trips, where we connect them to Indigenous role models and experts and institutions to bring learning to life in a way that they might not otherwise have access to, being in a community that might only have a few dozen or a few hundred people. There might only be one student in high school. How do you ensure that they have access and they're aware of the opportunities that are available to them, not just what they see in their community, but the whole world? And so it's really been an honor as an organization to kind of be called in to do that work. And so we put a lot of the founding vision of future-friendly schools and the professional development work on hold to be able to really support that journey with Connected North. But we decided to come back and with Lucy last year at the global reception at ISTE to make sure that I think more than ever, we want to ensure that we are reinforcing, we're sharing our lessons learned, we're strengthening a community around these 3 principles that we still feel like are essential and we're seeing more and more need for globally. These principles I've spoken about around global citizenship, student voice and agency, and environmental stewardship. And what we thought would be useful, originally we had this idea of future-friendly schools being like a certification that schools would have to go through and assess themselves. But what we thought is, why not just create a community around this? And so we've launched kind of a beta website at futurefriendlyschools.org. And we welcome all of you and invite all of you, just like I've done today, to share your projects, to share your practices, to share your research, and to share your invitations to a community of schools to participate, learn from, build on, borrow your ideas, or join your initiatives in those 3 areas. Because I think we need to ensure as a sector and as a community that we're calling others in, we're inviting others to participate, and we're strengthening practices around these ideas. So the Future Friendly Schools website has project profiles, and it also has school profiles. And I invite you all to create organizations to create your project profiles, and we'd love to feature initiatives and projects that any organizations attending here are doing to bring together networks of schools in those areas. And we'd also love to promote and highlight schools that are doing great work and showcase and share and celebrate profiles and portfolios of projects. And so we've decided to make this a completely open resource and to build a community around this as a way to come back to that focus and to ensure that we continue to build on and share the momentum that was created. So as we kind of wrap up, and I welcome any questions people have as well, and would be happy to connect with any of you who are interested about partnerships and collaboration and how we can continue to grow this momentum either at conferences like this one, or I know Lucy and I are still talking about what we might do at ISTE. How can we bring this international component, bring global citizenship, bring these priorities back during a time when there's a lot of trends around isolation, around kind of focusing on our countries, our regions first. How do we ensure that this isn't lost in some of the political changes that are happening in many countries around the world, especially as the call for action becomes more urgent around issues like climate change. So how might we connect more deeply to people and places around us? How can we explore learning and collaboration opportunities? I invite any of you who are at schools and want to learn from, build on, take and reuse any of those learning resources that we created for educators around, how do we build capacity for student voice and global citizenship and environmental stewardship? We've taken all of those course materials that we developed over the past 2 decades, and we've put them online in a free online learning community called Innovative Teaching for Social Impact. We've had thousands of people visit and take and build on those resources. We welcome you to do the same as well. We just want to make sure that the most number of people possible have access to those types of learning experiences. And I know there's many organizations here. I saw Zoe in the chat from IHE and many others that have even accredited programs and have other resources. And so I think it's just important that we all celebrate and promote and share resources as much as possible. And finally, I think most importantly, in terms of ensuring that this next generation is able to continue to grow the momentum that many of us have started, how do we demand that our systems, our institutions, our governments encourage and invest in student and youth-led ideas? And I think, we're proud that the initiative that we started in Canada with Rising Youth provides a model and a template for that. We welcome opportunities to inform and share and hopefully spark that same kind of youth-driven and youth grant making around the world, whether that's within schools or within systems. We hope to see other governments and other organizations kind of take up that charge and make more funding accessible in other regions as well. And so I just wanted to close with this thought, which we shared in our founding years, and that folks at Starbucks ended up putting, I don't know if some of you remember, they used to have this series of quotes on their cups. And so they put my co-founder Jennifer's quote, which is, I think, in the work that we all do, we are wondering and we're finding out what happens when young people are actively engaged in all aspects of society, and the way that we're together as a community, encouraging them to think of themselves as community leaders, problem solvers, role models, and key stakeholders. I know we're all eager to see how the world will change. So thank you for having me. Thanks to Lucy and the volunteer team for all their hard work in putting this conference together. And we welcome opportunities to collaborate, to amplify each other's work. And I know that we're all committed to building a larger community around this work and including many others at this critical time for education and critical time for global citizenship, given the challenges that we face and I think the political headwinds that we're beginning to see in some of the countries that we're working from. So thank you for joining, and have a great rest of the conference. And shout out, thank you, Julene. I see the Julene's here. For those of you who are learning about Commit to Act, there's some amazing learning resources that Julene put together to support educators in using Commit to Act and integrating it into the curriculum. So definitely check those out. I will also share that link in the chat. And those are supports for you if you're interested, for example, of putting including Commit to Act into the classroom and into your curriculum. So thank you all.